Hi, everybody. My name is Basim Jabber. I, uh, I'm a lifelong resident here of Santa Clara County. I live in San Jose. And I think about as far back as I can remember, I've always had a desire to connect with my surroundings and learn about my local area. Um, and I think really it accelerated to a tipping point when I got my driver's license of all things, and you start just driving around and exploring your surroundings. First you did it with the bicycle, and now you're doing it with the car. And I would drive around and I would look around my surroundings and pick a road and just drive and see where it would go to. Like I remember I picked Saratoga Avenue one day and ended up in Santa Cruz and thought, wow, that was really neat. And I would, visually be aware of my surroundings. And I started to, it wasn't until about maybe 2006, after I'd been living in San Jose, the southern part of San Jose, that I looked up at a mountain to the south here, and it's the Sierra Azul Open Space Preserve of the Sierra Azul mountain range, and noticed a pretty unmistakable structure on top that I know everybody else looked at and saw. And I never really gave it much thought until that one day in 2006 when I thought I'd like to learn more about it. And I had just started really getting into photography back then. And I think John, that's about when I started to meet John, and maybe around 2007. And I took a fascination into the mountain, and which is known as Mount Umunhum. And there's a long Native American history to that name and to the mountain, which is said to be the creation story of the native Ohlone Indians. And but more what people here recognize it for was an unmistakable structure on top that everybody kind of identifies with. Like when you look to the east foothills or the east hills, you see Mount Hamilton with the Lick Observatory atop it. And when you look south of San Jose, you see Mount Umunhum with what's left of a Cold War radar that was used during between 1958 and 1960 and 1980, that particular radar. And I started to kind of peel back the layers and had no idea that there was a Cold War radar station right here in our backyard, and kind of in my backyard, really. I lived very close to it. And I was really intrigued by that. And I wanted I was into photography, and I wanted to get up there and photograph it, and found out quickly that it's not open to the public for a number of reasons. There was private property up there. There was a lot of hazardous materials still up there that needed to be cleaned up, and a pretty overcautious agency that just didn't want the public up there at the moment. As I really started to peel the layers back and get deeper and deeper, I started to find out that there was a really rich history to this site, and how it was directly connected to the welfare, the sort of the progress and the prosperity of what was once the Valley of Heart's Delight, which is what we know today as Silicon Valley. And you never really think that a building up there had that much to do to it, but when I found out what that building was, what was on it, what was around it, who was up there, I really started to realize that this is a strong piece of history of the South Bay. In fact, all of San Francisco Bay Area and even the Monterey Bay Area. And of course, I got to know the agency that owned the property that it sat on, and got to know a lot of the locals who owned property around it and even lived around it. And quickly realized that the plans were in the work to tear everything down up there. And I guess I'm not really a preservationist in terms of, in my past, I never really gave that much thought, but I felt that the desire to tear down that piece of history was wrong. And so I stepped in, and what happened was a long journey that I never thought I'd get this far involved in. And I'm glad I have, because I've met so many people, I've learned so much, and I've enabled so much. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So photographing it was one thing, and I'll bring up a screen of, I'm going to bring up my screen here and let you see what it looked like. So this is what it looked like when it was in operation. This is actually just after this Cold War radar was built, before it even went live in production use. In fact, you can kind of still see some equipment down at the bottom outside the door there that's still being moved in. And the cars give it a really good sense of scale. During the Cold War, the United States Air Force had several hundred radar stations all around the country. And of course, the need for air defense came out after we had dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. We quickly realized that that could eventually happen to us. And so air defense was born from that time, and it grew to what is now satellite-based defense. So ground-based terrestrial radars today are generally used for commercial aviation, not so much detecting an incoming bomber with a bomb. But back then, in order to deliver an atomic payload, you had to fly in and drop it. And of course, as nuclear arms miniaturized and got smaller and can go on a warhead and be launched from a submarine or a warship, or even from today, a silo in the middle of your home country soil, somewhere like in Colorado, and go intercontinental and deliver its payload within 30 minutes. So a ground-based radar was ineffective at that point. So as technology progressed, sites like this became obsolete. But that doesn't mean that their finite point in time that they were around meant nothing. They really helped Silicon Valley become what it is today, which is, you know, this technological powerhouse of the world. There's a lot of high-tech companies that set up shop here that thrived under a blanket of air defense provided by the Air Force at sites like this. And as I wanted to learn more about the site, and this wasn't the only building on the site, obviously there was a total of about 45 other buildings that people lived and worked in, and realized that, wow, up to 125 airmen and their families lived on this site. You know, for 22 years, the site was in operation, basically scanning the skies for any incoming, airborne attack, which would have been more than likely Soviet bombers. And I learned a lot about this site. I met a lot of the veterans who were stationed here. A lot of them are very good friends of mine now. A lot of them still live here in the area, in fact, and ended up starting a group of, Almaden Air Force Station veterans. That's what the site was called. It was called Almaden Air Force Station because it was atop Almaden Valley. And the Air Force constructed this site in 1956. And this wasn't the original radar on the site. There was a smaller one that had less, shorter range, but then they built this one, which is a General Electric model FPS 24, which is a long range search radar. So it spun around and it would detect a blip and it would tell you how far out and in what direction, but it wouldn't tell you how high. So there was a couple other ancillary radars called height finders, which would scan up and down and give you the elevation fix. But unique about this model FPS 24 was that it was the largest ground rotating radar that the Air Force used during the Cold War. It was also the highest power radar. It operated at a normal 5 megawatts. That's 5 million watts. In your microwave oven in your kitchen is about 1,000 watts. So it's a lot of RF energy that came out of that feed horn and reflected off into the air that, scanned for an incoming jet or a bomb. The construction of the building, which is of brutalist architecture, was very functional. And a lot of people say, oh, it doesn't look very pretty. Well, it wasn't designed for aesthetics. It was designed to be functional. So midsections, there's 10-inch thick concrete, and the buttresses and the ribs are 16-inch thick concrete, 1-inch rebar enforcement, rigid tie cage, 5.5 floors, no windows. All of these are equipment door or vent openings. And the special 4-layer paint coating and the structural compound of this tower was built to withstand the heat flash and the atomic percussion blast of a nuclear bomb up to a mile away. So it was built for functionality. Now, of course, if the Soviets got a bomber through, they wouldn't drop a bomb over Mount Umunhum. They would drop it over the valley, which is more than a mile away, because it would do more damage there. So a radar like this would stop spinning, let the bomb hit, and then it would resume spinning and scanning and operation. So it was built for resiliency. There was only 12 models of this radar around the country, although there were a couple hundred radar stations. And this one was the sort of the granddaddy of them all. And it was also the gold standard because General Electric used this particular radar to benchmark all of the calibration standards for all the other ones like it around the country, the other 11. Now, of course, when satellites took over for air defense, sites like this were declared excess and they were shuttered. This one closed in 1980, and they removed the antenna and the feed horn assembly off of the top of this radar. And so what was left is the concrete structure. And there are, of the other ones that are around the country, they all had their radars removed except for one, which is on the tip of Long Island. And it's declared historic. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. And I kind of use that one as somewhat of a precedent, even though the radar wasn't on top of this one, and people said that it lacked its historic integrity because of that. I argued against that. And I argued that even though there is no radar on top of this, that it still retains its historic integrity. It still has its ability to convey that significance and that integrity. And of course, I found out that the Open Space District wanted to tear this site down. I started documenting it, photo documenting it. And that meant chartering aerial helicopter, photography to survey the site. You can see images like this were taken in 2009, where you can see the main radar tower and the height finder radar on the far right, as well as some of the other buildings that were there. The operations building, that's these two buildings here. And it's funny, this building here is a computer shop. It actually housed a computer, which by today's standards, everything that was in this building can be contained on your iPhone. That's how much computing power has progressed. And I realized that when the Open Space District, they're an open space district, and they do their job well. They preserve a green belt of land so that no one develops it, and they provide it for trail system and basically people to enjoy nature and outdoors, and that's a good thing. And I'm glad that they do that. But from time to time, they will buy property that has structures on it. And some of those structures are eligible for historic status. And if there's no one there to save them, and no one really cares about them, then sadly they get torn down. And I didn't want that to happen to this structure, because not only is it a strong visible landmark to the South Bay, it's a strong historical landmark. So I set out on a journey through working with the Santa Clara County. I started there. Instead of going to the state or federal, I started with the closest layer I could, which was the county, because it resides in unincorporated Santa Clara County. It's not in the city. And of course, the county, the Historical Heritage Commission wanted to save it as well, and basically gave me my marching orders, which the process to follow. And so I did that. So I commissioned a historical resource evaluation of the radar tower. In fact, there already was one done, and it was done by the owning agency. And they hired a firm from San Francisco to do a historical resource evaluation on the entire site. And they deemed nothing on the site was worth keeping, nothing qualified for historic status. And I was shocked at that, and I didn't agree with it. So I hired another consultant to analyze just the radar tower, which was the main focal point of saving. And we demonstrated that it did retain that historic integrity, and submitted that to the county. And the county kind of scratched their heads and said, well, we don't know what to do. We have two conflicting reports with a non-consenting owner that doesn't want to keep it. And so they did all that they could do, which was hire a tiebreaker. And it was another third firm out of Davis, California, that specialized in historical resource evaluations of military structures. And they came in, did a peer review of both the reports as well as their own field visits. And I'll bring up the conclusion, and you can see they concluded right here. I'll zoom in here, and or if you can see that, if you want me to get at, I'll make it bigger here. They concluded that the radar tower is indeed historically significant under the county, Santa Clara County Heritage Resource Inventory. And that's really what we were going for, was someone to just tell us, yeah, it qualifies, and let the county kind of go from there. But not only did it qualify for county, both Heritage Resource Inventory and landmark status, But we were told that it qualifies for California Register of Historic Resources and National Register of Historic Places, which those two really kind of surprised. And the fact that it qualified for those, not even having to actually be on those registers, gave it added protection. And the result of that tiebreaker, which was in our favor, led that county historic heritage resource commission to vote to basically write a letter of recommendation to the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors to list this tower on the Heritage Resource Inventory. And about a month after that, the 5 Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to save this tower. And so let me go back to this. And so here's kind of a photo of what Almaden Air Force Station looked like in 1967. It was a thriving military installation, many structures. It had housing, it had a central cantonment, it had an operations area, it had a paved road going in, going out. They had everything up here but schools. They had their water supply, they had deliveries brought in for food and services. They had civilian employees that worked here as well as military, officers and non-commissioned officers, as well as regular airmen. And this is what it was on the right in 2009 when I took this photo from a helicopter, and you can see kind of Mother Nature sort of taking back. The trees were taller, but all the buildings were still there. Some of them were in pretty bad shape. And we thought that the only one that was really worth keeping, that we had to focus our attention on, was the one that's the most visible, which is the radar tower. And after the open space district saw that the county wanted to save it and voted to save it, they then, I guess you can say, conceded and decided to keep it. Their plan was to actually have it removed off the site, but they ended up keeping it. And they have then voted to spend some money to do the preservation. But before this whole process started, they gave the public sort of the marching orders. They had come down to 3 options. One option was to tear it down completely. Another option was to partially tear it down, which nobody really understood that one. And then the third option was to retain and seal. Retain the tower, seal it, no public entry, but keep it there as a historic icon. And of course, we know that they were leaning towards their first option, which was to tear it down, and we were pushing towards option 3. And the night of that vote, they introduced the 4th option, which was to delay 5 years and give the public 5 years to go raise funds to help preserve it. And it was that night in the parking lot that myself and 5 others started the Conservancy as a nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit. We did all the paperwork, and several months later got official and started raising funds. And we're about to write a 6-figure check towards the preservation of this tower. Obviously, it's not going to cover all of it, but the Open Space District has agreed to foot the rest of the bill. But we did our part, and we raised 6 figures. And we were not only an agency that stepped in and saved it, but we put our money where our mouth is and came in and said, we'll raise funds to help offset some of the preservation costs. And so you can see what they've done here, which is where the buildings were. It's just, there's a turnaround circle up top. There's a big 56-car parking lot right down here, which is where the power generator building used to be. You can take the steps up to the top. You can drive up to the top and you drop off. And there's a world-class 3.7-mile hiking trail that you can hike up to the summit and get this really good reward of getting to the summit and seeing the views and the radar tower. And it's funny how I've talked to so many people that just wanted to touch it, just wanted to see the tower up close and touch it and be next to it. And really didn't even know anything about it, but just they've lived here in the valley all their life and they wanted to know about it and see it. So some of the pictures I took when the site was just prior to opening up to the public, you can see the Open Space District over an 8-year, $25 million project, turned it into an open park for people. And you can drive and hike and ride your bike up there today. Radar Tower is part of that history. It's there, and they're going to be doing the preservation work to finish doing all the concrete crack repair and grouting and repainting and a new roof on top of the tower to prevent any kind of water leaking. But interestingly enough, another assessment was done on the concrete of the tower, and that was done about a year ago. And that contractor said, even if you leave it in its current state and don't even do any preservation to it at all, it will not have any risk of collapse for the next 100 years, which is kind of a testament to how well this tower was engineered, and it was built to withstand time and the elements and basically people who wanted to tear it down. And they did a pretty good job of this park. For those of you who have not been up there, I highly recommend you go up there. The views are incredible. You can see all of the San Francisco Bay Area on a clear day. You can see all the way up to downtown San Francisco, Oakland, even north into, you can see Mount St. Helena, all the way up that far on a clear day. Great view. And this is the north face, the north wall, where they have a railing. And if you saw in one of my other pictures, another testament to just how you can kind of see how this tower was perched so close to the hillside here. Yet below, there's nothing underground, but there's 11 feet of solid reinforced concrete, and then grouted up to 50 feet, embedding this tower into the mountaintop. It's essentially part of this mountain. And some people argue that they don't like seeing that much concrete in nature, but to be honest with you, in order to build all of this park, there was more concrete poured in this mountain than what's in this tower, which surprised me. I got the numbers back from the construction company and looked at the original construction records, and it was considerably more concrete put into the mountain for the park. And so, for those of you who want to see the historic resource evaluation, if you'd like to get a copy of it, I can provide it for download, and you can look at it. The peer review is interesting because the peer review shows both of the reports, and then also the peer review report, which basically says the conclusions that it was declared historic. And so here it is. It's a piece of history. It's tangible. It's something you can see, something you can touch, something you can go visit, not just read about or look at pictures about. And it's a piece of history that belongs here in the Bay Area. I think I'll just open it up to questions now.
Okay, thank you, Basim. I think what we'll do first is have Jeremy speak, and then we'll do the questions at the end for both of you. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody's, Jeremy's, I guess you're up.
Okay, it's saying, yeah, it's saying I can't start because the host has stopped it. Here we go. Now we got it. All right, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me here today. Thanks, California Preservation Foundation. So John asked me to come on and talk a little bit about preservation photography I've gotten involved with. Let's just make sure we're sharing my screen. Over the years, how I got involved in it, how I've gotten involved in guerrilla preservation and tactical advocacy. Full screen. How's that looking?
Looks great.
Yeah,
Great.
Looks great.
That's a good place to start. Actually, I took this from a friend's presentation who did a presentation many years ago at my alma mater, School of Visual Arts, on people like me who like to enter abandoned spaces and do photography and be places maybe you're not supposed to be. And I thought he tapped into something really interesting here because, so this is a watercolor painting by J.M. Gandy, British painter, and it shows the rotunda of the Bank of England in the year of its completion of 1798, but in total ruins. So the then new Bank of England is envisioned in ruins. Curious thing, and it's something that people are attracted to. It's kind of an easy thing, and I think that one of the reasons why people have such an emotional reaction to ruins is because they're an extension of ourselves and our culture and our architects and our engineers, the things that we build. So when you see it falling apart, I feel like you kind of see yourself a bit in the architecture, which is part of what drew me to Basim Steel, which is near where I went to high school. Ironically, it shut down, went bankrupt right around the time I graduated high school. And it was always just kind of this place that captured my imagination. And I didn't know photography yet, but I knew because of this massive cathedral of industry, I needed to probably figure out photography. So I started sneaking in and I started taking very terrible photos. But over time, this place kind of taught me photography, and it also kind of got me back in touch with my industrial history, which I felt like I had largely lost touch with. And, you know, as the photos got better, people started reacting kind of the same way that reacting in the way that I was feeling when I was in there. Because when I was in there, I would have these experiences where, you know, it's hard to explain, but there was just something about like the fact that this place was quiet, and it used to make steel. So Bethlehem Steel was the second largest steel producer in the United States. It's responsible for a large portion of New York skyline, thousands of battleships, tons of rail, like just endless, you know, war resources. It was, you know, they called it the arsenal of democracy at one point. They developed armor-plated steel here for battleships. They invented the I-beam, which is still in use today. So I would just climb around this place and think like, you know, it wasn't used anymore. It's gone quiet. And in my experience there was like, you know, how could this be and what do we do here? So it's just something about the architecture, the light moving through, the smell of the motor oil from the internal combustion engines on the floor, spilling all over the floor like blood. And I was just kind of another layer in the history of this place. So I spent a long time there. I shot there for many, many years. You know, there's a lot of equipment there at the time. It's changed quite a bit since then, but, you know, I knew the place like the back of my hand, and I wasn't supposed to be there, but I didn't really care. I knew I just wanted to take photos there. It wasn't a place that they would really allow people to shoot. You know, I started going at night. It's kind of easy to sneak around at night, and then you just kind of learn to shoot under moonlight. And, you know, I would start posting the photos online and try to be kind of good with social media and tagging things probably so people can find the work. And after a few years, since the industry in Bethlehem was done, you know, they needed to find a way to reinvent this town. So unfortunately, that was to have a casino come to town to be the new economic engine. And we'll get too far into the politics of that, but they had to destroy a lot of the steel mill to make room for the footprint of the casino, which I don't think was completely necessary. But again, we're not going to get too far into my feelings about the casino today. So I had a friend who was supposed to be there. She was allowed to be on site. I was not supposed to be there shooting demo, but she was feeding me information on where I should be at what time. The left is the demolition of the weldment facility, which I timed really well. And she told me which blast furnace to be in and maybe to figure out what lens I would need at a certain time to get that shot. I'm glad that I was there. I'm glad that I did. On the right is the number 2 machine shop, which I believe was the largest industrial building in the world at the time of its completion. That is still there, but it is largely in a state of demolition by decay. So as they kept knocking it down, you know, I felt a piece of me kind of dying. It was kind of sad to watch this place that I'd fallen in love with be destroyed. But the one thing you can do, I realized with photography, is you can kind of freeze time and you can kind of, you know, get these buildings and go to these structures, you know, when they are in their in-between, like they're not in their original state and they're not in their, you know, they're just awaiting their new fate. And here I was up on the Hoover Mason trestle, and what you're seeing there actually is the parking lot being built for the casino. And I had never seen the light like that. You know, it's usually a pretty dark place shining on the number 2 machine shop. And I was glad I was there that day. But it was strange to watch it change. But, you know, we just snuck around in the shadows and got the images that we needed. So as I kept putting things online, the work got better and better. You know, people would start reaching out, which was kind of nice. You know, MIT Technology Review gave me a call because they saw the images and they were like, you know, we're doing an article on American industrial decline. Have those been published anywhere? I'm like, well, they've been in like galleries and things, but not necessarily like published. So they asked me if they could buy them for an article, which I thought was nice. Did a nice academic write-up about it, which gets the word out. You know, it's a way of me pushing the work out and getting it on social media, but people finding it and then getting it published and hopefully drawing people back into this history that I feel like, you know, we lose touch with. So as I was shooting a lot of the demolition of Bethlehem Steel, I met a historian named Mike Pierce, who's a very, very good friend of mine to this day. And he started telling me about, we had similar concerns with what was being destroyed. And, you know, he helped me realize that a lot of our industrial history was being destroyed at an alarming rate. And, you know, the one thing that I could do is I could help and I could volunteer. And what we realized through this presentation is I volunteered a lot. and used my own resources and my own time and just tried to make sure we get the image we need. And if you haven't been to, or if you're in the Bethlehem, Pennsylvania area, where they also have some online programs and things, they're doing a fantastic job with educational programming. They have an incredible collection of engines and all sorts of historical industrial artifacts. Check them out. So one of the things he tipped me off to is the fact that Sparrows Point, Maryland, in Baltimore, was going to be demolished. And it was always kind of on my mind, this other, even bigger than the footprint of Bethlehem, the Bethlehem site. So we had talked about, he had kind of organized, then I'm kind of getting affiliated with the National Museum of Industrial History. And sometimes they would organize, especially Mike Pearson would get his kind of dream team of photographers together to have permission to go in and document as much as we could. So they gave us permission. And at the last minute, they revoked it. 7, 8 fantastic photographers, Habs photographers, people like me and like all these sorts of people are going to donate their time. I don't know what the issue was, but I got a call from him saying they revoked our access. He was with my friend Alicia, and he goes, they were driving together, and he said, Alicia said, you guys might have to do this the old-fashioned way. And I said, well, we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. Now, drones weren't available at the time. So I noticed there was a municipal airport close by on the satellite. I said, let's go talk to the municipal airport, see if we can go up and assess that, because the site was partially active because they're doing demo. And we wanted to get, first of all, aerial photos, but we also wanted to kind of get a lay of the land and understand where there was activity, where there were trucks, where there were people, where there were not. So we did 2 things there. We got some interesting aerial stuff. I told the pilot, he's like, what do you want me to do? I'm like, just fly in circles for however long we've paid you for, just keep going round and round. So we're kind of visually figuring out where everybody was so we could figure out where to sneak in. And we're getting aerial shots and just documenting whatever we could. And unfortunately, all of that is gone now. I'm glad that we did what we could. There are many great photos of this Library of Congress as well, but it's kind of I've always tried to get in right before something goes away or changes, and this was a good example of that. Everything you're seeing there is gone now. So we spent a full day in there. We got a lot of great images. There were some places we could go, some places we couldn't. We just, snuck around and got the images that we could. Did kind of like a photographic preservation mitigation effort, which I enjoy doing. But it's interesting because sometimes it helps being affiliated with a museum, and sometimes it doesn't matter. And when we have to switch as photographers who are doing this type of work, if we would have been caught, we would have never mentioned a single museum. Would have been like, oh, we're just a bunch of stupid people with cameras. So let's fly to Alaska. This is a really interesting site. I was not aware of that this was on the National Trust for Preservation's list of 11 most endangered sites, Kennecott Copper Mine. A friend of mine showed me this image, not this image, this one's mine, but he showed me a photo of the space, and I was, into mines and mills, and I was like, well, when are we flying to Alaska? So a lot of my vacation time, I end up going to places like this and, seeing if we can get some photographs. So we made arrangements actually with the local alpine guides to have permission to photograph these buildings. Unfortunately, when we were on our way up there, they told us that they'd screwed up the dates, and they were doing their annual supply run for all their provisions for the first, however many months of the season, and they wouldn't be there. They also told us they wanted us to have a good time, and that a lot of the buildings were just wide open, and they didn't hear it. I didn't hear it from them, but just be careful. And we spent about a week up there. You can actually see some of the roof. They had already started doing, some of the money from the preservation effort, which is now, this has all been a huge preservation success, but you can start to see the roof and everything. But it was kind of in the very beginning, a lot of it's in bad shape. But you'll notice a little bit of roofing had gone in when we got there. A little bit of snow on the ground. Is an interesting time of year. Really incredible structure. It was just really nice to be up there. Just me and my one photographer friend, Jeff, had the place to ourselves. I think the population's probably 6 to 10 people up there in the wintertime. It's a massive, there's a big powerhouse there on the left. Those are the boilers from the 20s. All just sitting there. So so much equipment here, and we knew that. We'd done the research on it, and it's so remote that it was not cost effective to scrap anything. So it's kind of rare that you see all this equipment in one place. Big hoisting engine on the right. And one of the boilers, I believe that says 1916 on the boiler. Weren't many sounds up there except for the sound of the glacier. That's a huge glacier you're seeing on the left. It almost sounded like the sound of a car coming on gravel. We had to get used to what that sound was. We're like, is somebody coming? And it's just this like crunching noise. We're like, that's the glacier moving. It was the only sounds up there. So got some great photos. There's a lot more here on the website, but just wanted to show a couple to show you what that site looked like. This was at least probably 10 years ago. If you haven't been, make the pilgrimage. I think it's a national park, or if not a state park, I think it's a national park, and you can go visit and probably get tours of this building today. So putting those online and tagging them properly, and also releasing the images on Flickr at the time, which was a thing, maybe it's still a thing, but I don't use it. Kind of releasing the images in a way where I kept the rights, but doing Creative Commons attribution to a way where like nonprofits, educators, historians can use the images. I got an email from someone on Flickr like, hey, did you see the National Trust use your images for their article about Kennecott? I was like, no, but that's fantastic. That's why I did that. So I made friends with the National Trust, living in San Francisco at the time, became very good friends of mine, great advocates for saving places, and still good colleagues and friends there today. And getting involved with them, they introduced me to Heritage, kind of my journey into preservation. And I started volunteering for San Francisco Architectural Heritage in San Francisco, which got me into interesting buildings, things I didn't really know about. So it was fun for me because I got to volunteer to shoot. They were always happy to have my images, and I was learning a lot about San Francisco architecture. If you live in the Bay Area, you might recognize some of these. On the left is the former City of Paris Rotunda, which is encapsulated inside the 70s Neiman Marcus building. And on the right, that is Hibernia Bank, which I don't know if they have a tenant for that yet, but really neat to see that structure. So just a couple of the images. That's Hobart Building on the right. Some of the images I did for Heritage over the years. So then being involved with Heritage, getting back to Bethlehem Steel for a second. Bethlehem Steel had an operation on the West Coast. If you're in the Bay Area, you're probably familiar with what's happened at Pier 70. There's been a dramatic transformation of historic structures there. Now, I was interested because I'm working on a book on coal iron and steel in getting some images of Pier 70 because Bethlehem Steel bought Pier 70 in 1906, right before the earthquake. So using my connections with Heritage, they were like, well, we do know the preservation part of the port. And I got in touch with him and I said, hey, I'd like to volunteer to shoot 3 of these buildings. I can do historic American buildings, survey level, 4x5, black and white. They were going to have to do that anyway. So I started as a volunteer. We turned that into a paid job, but I did. Sometimes I'm like, these buildings are important. I'll shoot these structures for free. We can take it from there. So again, I got to photograph all of these structures and with legitimate access before they entered their new life. This has all been completely rehabilitated. If you haven't been down there, you live in the Bay Area, check it out. You can go into a lot of those buildings in the lobbies and see. This is interesting because that machine shop on the left, I believe is from the 1880s. And then you see kind of progression of architecture all the way to World War II concrete construction on the right. Just a beautiful place. It reminded me of Bethlehem Steel quite a bit. This is a massive machine shop. This has all been completely renovated now. It's the powerhouse, Chicago pneumatic compressors. Checking my time here, doing good. Building 101, this was Bethlehem Steel's headquarters. A lot of interesting architectural details inside there that we recorded before they did any renovation. See some interesting steel murals there. This was the Union Iron Works headquarters, which became Bethlehem Steel's hospital. It was like the original kind of company's HQ, but became their hospital space when Bethlehem took it over. So that is actually Pier 70. I believe that was another powerhouse or substation, I believe. The port was like, they're like, Jeremy, we'd love you to get some shots of the actual Pier 70, because that is Pier 70. They're like, one of these buildings is going to fall into the bay. We'd like you to get some shots. And I was like, yeah, no problem. I had an architect friend who wanted to go out in a canoe. And the port's like, Jeremy, we have boats, like we can take you out. I'm like, no, it'll be fun. Let's take a canoe. And me and my friend went out there in a canoe. Didn't have any problems. You see him kind of hastily holding my Hazelblad over the bay. There, no problem. Good rock climbing grip on there. They did talk to security before we went out there, because it was an active shipbuilding repair operation at the time, and they had a Navy vessel. They said stay 200 feet from the Navy vessel. They also said don't go under the pier. I was like, okay. So that's Pier 70 in San Francisco. So getting back to kind of the finale here, Martin Tower. This was Bethlehem Steel's headquarters. It was completed in 1972. It wasn't in use for very long. It was imploded, unfortunately, in 2019. On the National Register, I think it's a beautiful late century modern building. The city of Bethlehem didn't really think so or really care. But I always stop by and get some photos of it when I was in town. So we knew this was in danger for a long time. I've been very vocal with Facebook groups and things, and posting on Instagram, and making stories about how disappointed I was the city of Bethlehem would let this historic resource get destroyed. It's unfortunate, going from some of the projects I've seen on the West Coast to what I see, near where I grew up. There's just not a lot of appetite for preservation. But this was a few years ago. My friend Alicia was like, hey, do you want to go shoot Martin Tower? And I was like, yeah, how are we going to get in? She said, I have the keys. I was like, okay, let's go. So we were allowed to be there that day. All this is gone now, unfortunately. So again, the museum was, Mike Pierce at the museum got a couple of his, A-list photographers and friends to come during the demolition, document whatever we could. This was a huge loss. But again, interesting to see this structure in between its past life and waiting for its new life, which unfortunately is some sort of, I don't know, mixed use commercial garbage that they're going to build in its place instead of adapting it. I talked to the demo crew. They showed me some of the steel beams in the basement, and they were kind of cursing the construction because how thick the steel beams were. I mean, this was Bethlehem Steel's headquarters. They didn't really spare any expense on the steel. We were able to rescue, before they demolished the building, just truckloads and truckloads of documents. So aside from doing photography, a lot of times what I do is we do these kind of renegade mitigations where we go in with our hard hats and our headlamps and we see what's down there. And there were just thousands of documents, furniture, just anything you could imagine would be in the basement of the headquarters of a huge steel corporation. And we just, with the museum, we rescued dozens of truckloads of material that would have been destroyed otherwise. A few more shots of the end here. This is a photo of my friend Glenn. I wasn't able to be there that day. My friend Glenn at the museum did get in a helicopter and got a picture of the implosion. Thank you, Glenn, for letting me pop this photo in there. Wasn't able to be I'm not always able to just fly all around whenever I need to. But sad day for industrial history in Bethlehem. I was able to fly back, I guess a month or so later. They let me go on site. I wanted to finish this triptych. I'd shot it when it was in kind of pristine condition. And then when they were kind of doing demo on the inside, I wanted to go back and just get that one more time. As a mitigation effort, it wasn't much else I could do aside from all the documents we saved to kind of commemorate it. So that is on my last slide. There's supposed to be one more, but it doesn't really matter. That was the second to last slide. So in conclusion, save your buildings, save your industrial history, save your historic resources, adapt them, reuse them if you can. Do whatever you can to get involved with tactical advocacy, to try to get people to be reconnected to their history again.
Oh boy, we have so many questions, don't we, Chris?
I know. I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but why don't you start, John?
Oh boy.
Okay, so just before we dive into the questions, I thought I'd share something with Chris because she's doing a book on Alfred Hitchcock and
Look at that.
I love
scenes
it.
from Vertigo there. That's Building 101. It's actually a set that was based on Building 101, but the window scene is actually from Bethlehem Still in San Francisco there.
Oh, really?
So
That's amazing.
yeah. Yeah, I'm going to have to rewatch Vertigo just to catch that again.
Yeah, you got to catch up to me.
Okay, so that's right. And I'm looking forward to your book. I'm going to have to read your book when it comes out.
I'm trying to finish it.
And speaking of books, Jeremy mentioned you're coming out with a book on coal, steel, and
Coal,
iron.
and steel. We've been working on
right?
it for a while. Yeah, it'll probably be another year or so before we can get it out. But,
Okay.
yeah, we got 250 pages laid out. It looks amazing. And it's probably about 15 years of work. It's very difficult to put together 15 years of work into a book, but we're getting there.
Mm.
It's great. There were a lot of questions about some of these terms that we all use as, I hate to use the word insiders in preservation, but things like integrity and significance. And a lot of them were popped up when Basim was doing his presentation, and both of you as so-called, I would call you outsiders, but maybe you won't consider yourselves outsiders, but you're not a career preservationist, right? You don't deal in a day-to-day way with terms, with these technical preservation terms. So I think a lot of people were wondering what your thoughts were, and how did you familiarize yourself with this sort of secret language of preservation and make use of those terms in your own efforts. And then to follow that, Basim, a lot of people were asking, well, if all of the technology is gone, the radars, the computers, if all of that is gone, wouldn't the site no longer have integrity? How would you respond to that?
So that right there was the big topic of discussion during this whole fight to save this tower. That was so as you know, with regards to getting a tower declared or getting anything declared historic, it has to meet, those criteria for historic status. It was of age, it was built of time period. Nobody of significance was stationed there, and there wasn't, Elvis wasn't stationed at Almaden Air Force Station or anything like that. But the historic integrity was the big topic. A lot of people argued because there was no radar on top, because the equipment was removed, and so that was standard operating procedure for the military to do that to other sites. And like I said, the only one last radar where they were going to remove the antenna on top, and someone said, wait, stop. That's over at Montauk Air Force Station on the tip of Long Island. And it was then saved and put on the National Register of Historic Places. So the report, and I put a link to the report in the chat, the report will discuss that topic of integrity and how the tower itself, even void or sans radar antenna on top or equipment inside, still has that ability to tell that story, to convey the engineering might of Cold War technology back then in terms of and couple that with interpretive panels at the summit, and there are several of them there. Two of them I helped design, and couple that with volunteer docents and people like me who give tours on the site. There's a strong historic integrity still left there, but the tower itself, definitely, that was the big topic, and it was deemed that it still retained its historic integrity.
Great, thanks for that. I had a question. Oh, so
real quick,
ahead.
just FYI, while Jeremy was talking, and it was a good thing it happened while he was talking, my PC hung and I had to join back in, and I lost visibility to all the questions in the Q&A. So you have to read those back to me and I'll be able to answer them for you.
Oh yeah, we'll take care of you. I had a question actually for Jeremy, and then John will have a couple again.
Sure.
But somebody wonders, like, how do you in particular define tactical advocacy? What would be, I guess, the essential elements of that?
Well, kind of what I was explaining too is sometimes it's just getting your boots on the ground and using photography as a tool to kind of advocate for the preservation of a place, whether or not you save it or not. Doing any and all things necessary to get the imagery and document and get them into the hands of the right preservation organization or a publication that can get them out, to get people aware of what the issue is or how important the places are, was how I described the tactical advocacy.
Yeah,
Okay.
for me, for me, obviously it was the camera, right? And conveying those images. And John knows all about that. And I've been shooting with John. It's really neat to see him work. And it became really the biggest tactical component of that advocacy was, or a big part of it was obviously social media that helped get the word out. But more so just, shaking hands, rubbing elbows, meeting people, understanding the who's who and the what's what, going 5 wide, 5 deep on organizations, understand all the key players, know where to go in. Nobody thought to go to the county. I did. And I stood alone that day at the county commission. Nobody was behind me in the big gallery of empty seats. And they had no idea that the district was going to tear down that tower until I brought it to them. So you got to get out. You have to meet people. And that's really the biggest tactical advocacy component.
I like both of yours. Yeah, I like both of your responses actually, because they shed a different light. And I take part of the blame for naming this program Tactical Advocacy. I was taking that from Tactical Urbanism, which is a translated version from, and I'm digging deep back into grad school because I had read Michel de Certeau, which is The Practice of Everyday Life. And he translates tactical urbanism as a response to strategic urbanism, which is the formal sort of, the very top-down sort of structure of planning urban spaces. And this is more seen as sort of a bottom-up sort of response to that way of dealing with the environment that doesn't require the resources that a giant architecture firm would have, for example. And then, so there were a lot of questions here about research, and I'll leave it to both of you. Has your research of these sites inspired your preservation of other sites? In the case of Basim, is it other Cold War sites, or in the case of Jeremy, other industrial sites? In your efforts, have you been inspired to work on new sites that you've discovered?
Jeremy, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 1,000%, especially sticking with that Bethlehem thread. It's like once you start researching something, and I also have a historian who's, very academic and knows a lot more about the history than I do. He was the one who said, coal, iron, and steel is all related. I was into steel mills. So it's like, and once you start to research one Bethlehem site, you start to realize where the coal came from and where the canals were and where it's like you're just connecting the dots. And yes, one thing just leads to another. And eventually it just doesn't really surprise you that it's just this interconnected web of industrial history. And it all makes sense, the way the dots connect. It's a fun way to research, and it does lead you to other places to preserve and things that have maybe gotten forgotten.
Yeah, for me, it led the way. I mean, it set a precedent. It was the first time that there was a non-consenting owner that wanted to tear down a structure, and it got saved. And they eventually then consented to keeping it. And I notified a lot of Cold War veterans that were at other similar sites, and they notified other property owners of similar towers and said, if you need to get it declared historic, this is kind of a boilerplate of the process that you need to follow to go do it. And it is possible. It set a precedent, which is really kind of a key component there.
Definitely. Thanks for answering that. I wanted to have a little note from the chat window in here. Terry Johnson was wondering if Jasmine can send the email for further discussion on a conservation project. But Terry, you said that just to the panelists. So if you want to repost that to the panelists and attendees, and then Jasmine can get in touch with you. In the meantime, I had a question about photographic mitigation from Jim, and he's asking what kind of things, what I think he's saying is, he says, what elements makes a great photographic mitigation effort? And I would add to that, say, what type of things are you looking to document, especially if you know something's going to be demolished? What is it you're capturing the most part?
Who is that question for? I'm sorry. Is that for me?
Both of you.
Okay.
Yeah, for both of you. Yeah, you can start, Jeremy.
Let
Why don't you start?
Let me answer because, getting involved in like HABs documentation and secret mitigation and just becoming a bit of an extrovert with industrial sites, you learn when you do HABs documentation, you have to look for certain things. And you're looking for steam engines, you're looking for cranes, you're looking for historic machinery, compressors, woodwork details, windows, fireplaces. So it's kind of like you get trained over time in these sites on what to look for, and then you become a bit of an expert of like what to document and how to do it. And a lot of it is on film, large format, which is considered like a formal documentation, but it's something you train yourself over time for what is in these particular sites. And that's why I like working on the industrial stuff, because there's very specific things you want to look out for. And my historian friend has trained me. I didn't know the difference between a compressing engine and a steam engine until 10 years ago. Now I do.
Yeah, it was a lot more difficult for me because there wasn't much left. The equipment was gone, but I learned a lot about it from the people who worked on it, who are still alive, and the photos that I was able to amass and add to an archive and a collection of that history. And sometimes when I give tours, I talk about that technology, and it intrigues people because it's cool. I mean, think of it as high tech 60 years ago. It has an intriguing factor to it. But there wasn't much left. And so photographing it, when I got access to photograph the site inside and out, all the buildings, including the radar tower inside and on top and et cetera, there wasn't a whole lot left. And not because it was forcibly removed, it was just standard operating procedure that the military removed that. Where it went, I don't know. I know that some of the components were removed for scrap. I know that the Computer History Museum in Mountain View does have a Sage Cold War console, a weapons controller console. It's not the one from Mount Umunhum, but it's one just like it. But a lot of these Cold War computing systems are even used in Hollywood movies. Like kind of the Doctor Who sort of Hollywood movies that you see. Backgrounds of flashing lights and scopes and such. Did I find anything on the site that was, little tidbits here and there? Yeah, little things here and there. And I was able to rescue and preserve a lot of the smaller items. And then some of the items I got, some of the artifacts were given to me by the actual airmen who were stationed there. I'd get things just showing up at my house, and they would send me these boxes of all this stuff. And I said, here, you need to have this history, you keep it. And some of that resides over at History San Jose, and some of it resides here with me.
So I'm going to ask a question. I'll combine two questions into one. So these sites, as they get more attention from, I'll call it the urban exploration community. I don't know if you would consider yourself part of that, but as they get more attention from photographers and others who'd like to document the sites, it could sometimes lead to the destruction of the site, conversely, and people are wondering what your thoughts are on that and how you would combat it. And also, your thoughts, this is the second part of the question, your thoughts on historic parks that are really largely known for their ruin-like nature. Sites like the ghost town in Eastern California known as Bodie, or some of these other sites. How do you feel that serves its purpose in communicating history? So there's your two-part question.
Yeah, I know there was another question about someone asked about if there's a problem with graffiti or vandalism on the site. Ironically, not on the radar tower. I've seen graffiti on many other aspects of Mount Umunhum, but not on the radar tower itself. Also, they painted or coated the first, I think, 15 or 20 feet of the outside from ground floor up with an anti-graffiti coating. Mm-hmm. So if there is any, it comes off easy, but have not seen any yet. Obviously it's a delicate subject, right? Preservation versus, public access and the vandalism and the quote unquote wear and tear that can come onto a site. It is a fine line that you draw there between where do you keep it shuttered to where do you keep it, open up access, and there's a little bit of collateral damage in the latter, right? So you have to kind of accept that. Fortunately, something like the radar tower, it's concrete. It was, you can't really do much damage to it. I mean, even if you bring a jackhammer up there and start chiseling away at it, you're not going to do too much to it. So there wasn't really that big of a concern specifically with Mount Umunhum and the radar tower, but that's always a concern. Things like Bodie, that's great if you can find a specimen like that. But that wasn't going to happen on Mount Umunhum. A lot of the buildings were just really, really dangerous to even enter. They were dilapidated. They had a lot of hazardous materials in them, lead, paint, asbestos, some diesel fuel and kerosene and oil from the generator building, things like that. You can't just open that up to the public and put a fence around that building. People would just go over the fences and get in. So, and being a very risk-averse agency, the Open Space District had to demolish everything that was unsafe. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of buildings. There's several buildings that had potential, but in the end, we had to focus efforts on the main one, which is the radar tower.
And Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah, good questions. So the vandalism thing, I don't consider myself an urban explorer at all. Maybe urban archaeologist, but I am familiar with the practice. And it's unfortunate because it is a problem, and my following is enough. Don't have a huge following, but for what I do, it's significant enough that it does pose a risk, and enough urban explorers follow me that will probably try to copycat things, which is not great. Thankfully, I'm usually there at this point in my career with permission when there's security in places that they won't be able to get access to. And I'm doing 4x5 mitigation and getting it, at the right time. There's not a lot I could do. I do hide the locations. There's a lot of photography that I will just not put online for a very long time. Just try to keep it out of the hands of the wrong people. So that is a really sensitive subject. And I unfortunately probably am responsible for damaging buildings sometimes as much as I am preserving them. It's a really fine line. And what was the second part was about?
Historical parks that are sort of known for their ruin-like nature. So things like Bodie, how do you feel that serves a purpose in interpreting history?
I think Bodie's great. I mean, it's really popular in terms of ghost towns. I've been to a lot of other ghost towns, but I think in terms of the state being in charge of preserving a time capsule, I think it's really interesting. Also, Bodie is a fraction of what I think 2/3 of that town burned down. I think it's, there's not actually that much left. Everyone's like, oh, this was the ghost town. I'm like, this was a very small portion of that ghost town. But it's rare to see all of it. They've really, having the state be there, it's really rare and interesting to see all of the things inside the way they were left. And they don't let people go in the majority of the buildings. So it's interesting, and they protect it. It's not getting graffitied. It is illegal. It's probably against federal law to remove anything from one of those sites. So that's good too, but is there always the money to do that and have the Friends of Bodie? And I've always wanted to go volunteer there. You can go and, hang out there for a week or so and volunteer, but it's an interesting example. I think there should be more of that.
Yeah. And maybe to follow that before we close today is to follow with your mention of Bethlehem Steel and how it was unfortunate that a large portion of that site had to be removed in order for the casino to be accommodated, supposedly. But with Bethlehem Steel, would you see a treatment? And I think with Bodie, they call it a treatment of arrested decay, which is just basically leave it as is, try to stabilize the structure, but leave it as it was, even in a ruinous state. And do you think that would have been a logical way of treating Bethlehem Steel?
Sure. I mean, I think there would have been many more logical ways to treating Bethlehem Steel. I think it's interesting because this geography of thought, and in Bethlehem, they think it's a preservation success. I've seen some of the best and the worst. I would argue it's actually a huge preservation failure. But arrested decay is great. They talked about doing that. The original Casino de Sands thought they were going to be great preservation partners. So we care about the museum, we're going to preserve the buildings. They didn't care about anything except making money. As soon as they got in the door, they were not nice to the museum. They, didn't put any money in the buildings. The number 2 machine shop is falling apart. I've gone through and made Instagram stories and tagged them. I'd be like, you call this preservation? Your destruction of our historic resources? You think this is what preservation is? It's really upsetting. Obviously, I have really strong convictions about that, but I think there's a lot of other things that could have been done at Bethlehem Steel besides knocking down 2/3. They even just removed this huge press because it was like a turnabout that you go around by the casino. They were going to build something else. They're like, well, we got to take the press out. I'm like, no one could figure out how to incorporate this press. So they had to spend some money to move it. It blows my mind sometimes when you look at Pier 70 versus, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the huge differences in what has happened to those sites.
Great. Well, thank you both. I really appreciate your time today. I know you bring wonderful perspectives that I think a lot of preservationists need to hear. So beautiful photographs. Chris, do you have anything to add to today's program before we close out?
Yes, I posted Jeremy's Instagram in the chat. I didn't know if you have any other contacts. I know that Basim, you put your email in there, I believe. Thank you for doing that.
I'll
And
put
also,
the social media links in there as well.
Okay, great. And somebody I requested a copy of the chat. I will keep a copy in a few if you can't do it on your own, you can email me after, chris@californiapreservation.org, and I'll email you a copy of the chat as it saves as like a notepad file. But we wanted to really thank both of you for all of your time and your expertise in this area. It's a very unique experience, and I appreciate you sharing everything.
Thanks for having us. It was super fun.
Great. Well, what I'm going to do is type into the chat box a evaluation link. So let us know what you thought about today's program and what you'd like to see in future programs. I'm going to turn off my video. Our speakers are welcome to leave the room if they'd like, but I'll leave the room open for a few minutes for people to look at the chat and save the chat if they'd like, and we can send you one if you send us an email by request. So that's it for today. Thank you both.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. I have to go, unfortunately.
Bye.